Some of the hardest problems in the world exist far above the planet. Our job? To launch the smartest solutions, to protect our satellites, clean up our clutter, to propel breakthroughs in propulsion, to learn more about our place in the universe, to outpace emerging threats. Every day, the Aerospace Corporation uses the latest technologies to ensure our nation's safety and leadership in space.
Welcome to the Space Policy Show. We are so lucky to have Dave Eccles, Malina Hills, and Karen Jones here today to talk about outpacing the threat with an agile space enterprise. We're really happy that you're tuned in today. So you can engage with us in two different ways. You can ask questions via Twitter using the hashtag #TheSpacePolicyShow, hashtag #TheSpacePolicyShow. And you can also ask questions in the chat box below the video on Vimeo. So thank you so much for those of you who tuned in. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your questions. Really quickly, I want to cover the bios of Dave, Malina, and Karen. Dave Eccles is the Deputy Director for the Center for Space Policy and Strategy at the Aerospace Corporation. He's also the General Manager of the National Space Systems Engineering Division. In this role, he's responsible for providing support to senior decision makers in the Pentagon, which is extremely important, as you can imagine. Dr. Malina Hills is the Senior Vice President of the Space Systems Group at Aerospace Corporation. She's responsible for the company's support to all launch programs, ground networks, satellite programs, and all the programs overseen by the U.S. Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center, as well as support to Navy satellite programs. Karen Jones is a senior project leader and technology strategist, also with the Center for Space Policy and Strategy at the Aerospace Corporation. Many of you have seen Karen on our show before, so you're pretty familiar with her. Since joining aerospace in 2003, she's been responsible for performing and managing a variety of projects, including federal R&D grants, internal R&D projects, commercial remote sensing customer engagements, new space architectures for OD&I, and an R&D portfolio management for the Department of Homeland Security. We're so grateful to have you here today. Thank you for taking the time. Now over to you, Dave, to get us started.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. This is really a privilege for us to talk about the topic of continuous production agility. And specifically, we're going to talk about how that can help our space enterprise adapt to the changing threat and be more resilient. If you can bring up the first slide for me, that'd be great. One of the things I forgot to mention about Karen, she's published a number of papers for the center, and she was also responsible for editing this one. And I wanted to just draw attention to it. You can look on, this is the cover of the paper, Continuous Production Agility, Adapting at the Speed of Relevance. We're going to dive into that topic a little bit more today. And you can see the lower right-hand corner if you're interested in downloading the paper. You can see the address there. You can also go to the aerospace website and find it there. And we hope that you'll be able to follow up and read the details. Let's go to the next slide. All of us, I think, have been tracking the fact that the space environment has changed dramatically. If any of you were listening or following some of the recent news reports, General Hyten made a comment about our friends in Russia and a little bit about sort of the hypocritical way they approach trying to control what they refer to as the weaponization of space. The fact of the matter is that the Russians and the Chinese have been putting counter space systems up in orbit for quite a while. And if you look at this chart, it kind of gives you a reflection of what's going on worldwide right now in terms of different mission areas. But suffice it to say that space is definitely a competitive and it's a contested environment. And one of the things that we have to do in order to respond to what people like China and Russia, and possibly in the future others may do, is we need to have a very agile, adaptive space architecture and space enterprise. This chart actually shows you for 4 different mission areas. For the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance mission area, if you will, spacecraft that can surveil the ground or take pictures of the ground. There's many commercial systems doing this as well as government systems. And the circles on the chart represent the numbers of spacecraft that each of the major space powers, the United States, China, Russia, and then purple is the rest of the world. So blue is the US, yellow is China, red is Russia, and then the purple is the rest of the world. And you can kind of get a comparison in each category of missions, how many spacecraft are actually up there. And you can see that, at least in terms of satellite communications and ISR systems, the United States still has the preponderance of systems. But if you look at the Chinese and the Russians, you can see that for communications, the Russians are very well represented. But in ISR, the Chinese have a significant number of capabilities. And if you move down the chart, you can see in navigation. It turns out that the way the world is right now, every single country, or the major countries, and the Europeans, which of course is another major block of industrialized nations, they all have their own precision navigation and timing systems on orbit. The US has GPS, the Europeans have Galileo, the Chinese have their Beidou system, and the Russians have GLONASS. All of these systems are kind of doing the same thing. And it's just interesting to see how that's playing out. And then, of course, finally, we have the science and technology area, and you can see the mix there. But the bottom line is space is no longer a bipolar situation. There are multiple players, multiple near peers with the US, and many, many other people that are starting to get involved. You can go to the next slide. So this challenge is one that's been well recognized by the leadership in the Pentagon. And when Patrick Shanahan was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, he came to the Aerospace Corporation and he actually gave us a challenge. He said, I know you guys, claim to be the experts in space. We've got some real challenges right now. I want you to go and take sort of a clean sheet look at this. Give us some ideas of what we can do to have a more credible combat capability in a contested environment, more lethal and resilient capability on orbit, more able to support the multi-domain threat. What can you guys do? What can you guys suggest that might be things that we can do to sort of move towards a much more resilient space enterprise for the Department of Defense? We came back after a crash effort that involved a lot of effort from scientists and engineers all across the company with 4 recommendations, and they're listed on this slide. The first one was to realign space acquisition for agility and resilience, primarily through increased production, a modular and open architecture, and a contracting approach that supports greater competition. This is what we're going to focus on in today's webinar. This is the continuous production agility concept that is highlighted in the paper. The other 3 recommendations we made were use modern systems engineering to create a single agile space enterprise, accelerate advancement with meaningful prototyping, and partnerships. That means partnerships with industry, partnerships with academia, partnerships with other nations, especially our allies and friends. And then also to streamline decision-making for requirements, resources, and acquisition. If you think about the second and the fourth item on this list, and the emphasis that's going on right now with respect to digital engineering and digital headquarters, it's a big push right now in the Department of Defense. A lot of the things that are in there are things that are related to some of the recommendations that we originally made. But we're going to focus today on the first one, which is continuous production agility. And what I'd like to do now is turn the time over to Karen Jones so that she can explore that continuous production agility and how it can help in more detail.
Thank you, Dave, and hello, everyone. I'm happy to talk to you today about this very important topic. But first, I want to back up and talk about, in general, what are the different operational paradigms? And then we'll get into CPA a little bit more. Next chart, please. So this quad chart represents various operational scenarios that we've seen throughout the years. There is no right or wrong operational paradigm, only a right and wrong time for each. And as Dave indicated, the threat environment is different today, and we need to respond in an agile way to these increasing capabilities that our adversaries are presenting. It's a very, very dynamic time. In this quad chart, you see the x-axis, and that represents the degree of responsiveness that we need to respond to the threat. Off to the left, static threats. To the right, it's more dynamic. On the y-axis, that represents the degree of interoperability and modularity. So as we look at this, and we start in the lower right quadrant, that has been the traditional place where we've been for quite a while. High-value assets. High-value assets are not modular. It's very customized, and they're often very good, exquisite systems for a very specific need. However, as General Hyten pointed out, these high-performance assets could become big, juicy targets with the new threat scenario that Dave outlined. So if we were to move up to a more dynamic environment and a more interoperable modular environment, that is the home of continuous production agility, which we're going to outline further today. This is a fast-moving threat environment, and in this operational scenario that we see today, we think it makes sense. This allows us to optimize our ability to respond to a very dynamic environment with frequent innovation, frequent technology insertions. So the modular space bus will allow this. And the key here, and you hear this a lot in the commercial world, future-proofing, it is a buzzword, but I think it's important to note that CPA really is about future-proofing our space systems. A future-proofed satellite, which has some degree of modularity, allows the satellite to be extendable and useful in the future, despite these unknown threats that might emerge. Next slide, please. So this graphic overview shows CPA against the previous paradigm, which is high-value assets. Each of these yellow boxes represents a contract. As you can see off to the left, the distance between the payloads at the top with the little antennas and the space buses below represents a rather long integration time. And this is because it's a very customized system between the bus and the payload. And these are single source contracts as well. Off to the right is the CPA paradigm. Key to this is the payload standard interface specification. This is the glue. Above, you see the various payload providers. Each has their own contract, so they can customize for any of the bus providers below. The bus providers also have one contract for multiple missions. So not only are we looking at a standard interface specification for mechanical, data, and thermal interfaces, we're actually introducing a rather modular system for the contracts themselves. And the government sits in the middle, and they operate as the orchestra conductor, looking at all the different types of couplings that could occur between the variety of payloads and the bus providers, where we'd need at least two to make this work, possibly more. But more importantly, off to the left, you see new technology. At any time, a new technology can come in and be introduced, and as long as they innovate and adapt to the standard interface spec, they can also play. This allows the system to be friendly to new innovations. And as part of this, we are working with a group of primes, tier ones and tier twos, and non-traditional space players to move towards this industry consensus standard. Now, it's an industry consensus standard, but it's also led by government. It's kind of a hybrid standard. And the end state to this will be a digital environment so that we can have virtual integration studies take place as opposed to expensive physical mock-ups. And this will also hasten the overall build. Next slide, please. So this slide is more relevant now than ever. We are in the middle of what is probably a black swan event with this pandemic. It's just created chaos throughout many, many industry supply chains, including possibly space. This chart represents how do we prepare for an unstable future and the various peaks and valleys of our past recapitalization efforts. And you can see this chart goes back to 1990. You can see the giant plus up, and now we're at the end of the right side of the graph, perhaps with increased budget tightening due to increased spending to address COVID, we might be on the precipice of some serious budget tightening. So how can we create a stable environment where the suppliers are not left vulnerable? One of the things we want to avoid is what economists refer to as the bullwhip effect. The bullwhip effect is also known as demand amplification, and it's very pernicious. It can leave suppliers vulnerable to excess capacity. We think CPA is a way to introduce some predictability and stability into the supply chain and remove these peaks and valleys of spending. And we think the survival and advancement of any enterprise, including the space enterprise, largely depends upon the health of the supply chain. We need the supply chain to run smoothly. And some of these tier 2s and tier 3s have very, very specialized parts and materials. And we think it's more important than ever for space. And CPA is designed to remove these severe fluctuations in demand. Next slide, please. So it's not just thinking about the acquisition and how do we smooth that out. It all starts with the launch tempo as well. Stabilizing the space industrial base and leveling out these peaks and valleys of spending will depend upon this regular launch cadence. Currently, the current approach has been to launch on need. Launch on need is based upon replacing failures or expiring satellites, and these satellites in the past have had pretty impressive long lives. So technology insertions have not been very frequent. Under this paradigm, satellites are designed for Class A, very long life. When they fail or we think that they need to be replaced, we start up a new acquisition cycle. The bottom represents what we'd like to see for the CPA approach. We call this launch on schedule. It depends upon a modular open systems architecture for continuous improvement. Now you'll notice that the dark green here, non-recurring engineering, is greater initially for building a system that is modular with standardized interfaces. It takes a little bit more upfront to ramp that up. But ultimately, you see several benefits that can occur by doing that. One is a modular architecture allows you to increase technology insertion for each generation. So each generation is extendable. This is what I refer to as future-proofing. You can see that as you get further into the cycle, you have less non-recurring expenditures. So we think this is a good approach whereby each generation of satellite can extend its relevance. Next slide, please. So continuous production agility depends upon several enabling elements. The first one is streamlined innovation and efficient production and commitments to certain quantities. This involves compressing your requirements cycle between the time you identify your needs and you deliver. It also involves a commitment to multi-year procurement commitments and also procurement efficiencies through consolidated contracts, which I spoke to about earlier. In addition, system interoperability and modularity, that's the second key enabling area. This is aligned with DoD's MOSA efforts, or Modular Open Systems Architecture. This lowers per unit cost for spacecraft buses, including NRE. It encourages a variety of bus payload pairings and, again, the regular technology insertion opportunities to outpace the threat. Another important, before we go on for system interoperability, another important thing is it can actually help minimize potential vendor lock-in or technology lock-in. It encourages an open ecosystem of innovators. It's a friendly platform to innovate on top of. Space enterprise integration is another enabling platform. It involves the government working as the orchestra conductor to oversee the architecting and integration of the payloads. Another enabler is digital engineering, or what the World Economic Forum refers to as Industry 4.0. And this involves a virtual environment such as model-based systems engineering. And this way you can reduce the need for actual physical mock-ups and also premature design lock-in and some expensive physical testing. And then finally, but not last but not least, is DevSecOps strategy for the space enterprise. This involves end-to-end security. It is a shared responsibility. It ensures that security is implications rather than bolted in a haphazard way on, and you're also adding to security through your workflows as well. Again, end-to-end security. So these are the key tenets behind CPA. It is going to require a cultural shift from these point solutions to these more agile solutions. But given what we know about the threat environment and the general environment, which is fast moving when it comes to technology and technology changes, we think it's applicable now.
Thank you, Karen. Now we're going to have an opportunity to have a little bit of a conversation. I'm going to ask some questions, and we'll have an opportunity to hear from both Karen, who was just presenting to us, but also and especially from Dr. Malina Hills, who actually is in the midst of managing the acquisition of Air Force space programs and launch programs. And she's right in the middle of what's going on right now with trying to implement SMC 2.0 and some elements of continuous production agility. So I'd like to start off with the first question for Malina. Malina, we heard a lot about high value assets and legacy systems. And of course, one of the things we always think of is, boy, those spacecraft take a long time to build. Can you help us understand why it was that spacecraft, particularly government spacecraft, used to take so long to build?
Of course, Dave, and you and I have both been involved in some of the reports that aerospace has done on that topic. What we found is that it takes an average of 10 years to get from authority to proceed, to build a satellite, all the way to ready to launch. And when you think about it, that's a lot longer than it takes industry to build a commercial satellite. And one of the differences between how industry builds and how we do on the national security space side is that industry uses production lines, right? They have stable suppliers, stable designs. They use the same processes such that their workforce is familiar with the process. They know how to test things. They know what's expected in terms of the requirements for the parts. And so they have far fewer problems. In addition, industry does a really good job of planning technology upgrades. So they will develop technology on IRAD, internal investments, and they'll qualify the technology on IRAD also prior to inserting it into their production line. On the national security space side, we have nothing like that, right? We've got individual programs that each buy their own space vehicle, and they buy them to different standards. So we don't use the contractor's command media, and we have different test requirements and even piece part requirements from program to program, regardless of whether they're for the same prime contractor or different prime contractors. So we really don't have production lines. When you start with the first vehicle in a block, you also infuse a lot of technology because you haven't refreshed the technology in over 10 years. So you want to get as much in there as you possibly can in order to improve your capability. So that's another thing that we do that really slows down a program. And I know you and I were both working on SBIRS for a while, and the first SBIRS space vehicle actually took something like 14 and a half years to get from contract award to ready to launch the first satellite. And there's a lot of other reasons why these things happen. On the SBIRS, for example, it was started under acquisition reform and there wasn't enough money to get it going. So the the program manager stretched out the schedule in order to build the satellite since he didn't have enough money. But that's a topic for perhaps another policy discussion that you and I can have. And suffice it to say, a lot of the reasons we go so slow is that we don't have that commercial production, which hopefully CPA will help us with.
I definitely don't want to relive any of the Nunn-McCurdy breaches that were associated with SBIRS. That was painful. Karen, let me turn to you. What do you think are some of the elements of CPA that can help us sort of go faster, and why is it so important to do those things now to outpace the threat?
Well, I think it's important to create an environment where the commercial sector can shine. So I think the first thing is thinking about these standards. We need to listen to industry. It needs to be industry consensus, but government-led. And I think that combination is important. I also think it's important when we think about those interfaces, know when to stop. Each vendor will want to shine in their own unique proprietary way. We don't necessarily need to standardize everything, just enough to ensure interoperability and ensure a certain level of security, obviously. But we don't want to address more than we need to. And this way, we encourage each player from the commercial sector to come to the table, the modular platform, to their capability as well. So I think that's going to be very important moving forward. We're working now through industry consensus towards the standard, and it's a little bit of a road ahead, but I think it's going to be very important to listen to industry.
Thanks, Karen. Anything to add, Malina?
No, I think Karen has captured it well.
Okay. Let me throw the next question to you then. What is SMC doing right now to advance the CPA concept?
Three main things. First, they've stood up a program office to acquire a combat bus line. Second, they've continued to work on that interface standard that Karen has discussed. And third, we're starting to get some programs out there that are using the CPA concept. So in terms of standing up the program office, last year SMC reorganized under SMC 2.0, and they created a development core whose job it is to really get the technology built and inserted into systems fast to get capability to the warfighter, and then a production core, which does the stable build, sort of the production line mentality. So they're already sort of focusing on CPA-like concepts. They've stood up this combat bus organization. It is working on developing those interfaces or standards with industry. There's two of them, as Karen has said, one for the payload to the bus and another one for command and data handling. In addition, they're doing some studies, including a conceptual design of what a satellite that could accommodate multiple types of payloads would look like, and that'll help inform industry and government decisions on the interfaces and the modularity. And then the third piece are the programs. So there are some small programs where we're building payloads that will be hosted on other buses. An example is the Space Situational Awareness payload that's going on the Japanese QZSS satellite. We're also looking at what's the first program that's going to be on CPA. So some options are the Enhanced Strategic SATCOM, ESS, which is the follow-on to Advanced EHF. There's also the Protected Tactical SATCOM System, PTS. And so either one of those could be the first CPA satellite. We're making a lot of progress. We're doing some studies for the Joint Requirements Oversight Council for ESS to look at what are the pros and cons of taking a CPA approach. So hopefully we'll have a program up and along the CPA path soon.
That's exciting. It'll be really interesting to see how this unfolds and see what the Air Force does with this exciting approach. Any other thoughts in that regard, Karen?
Well, I think it's going to, be important, again, to create the right incentives for the bus providers and the payload providers, and they're already thinking about that. How can you get strong commitments? I think that's going to be very attractive nowadays, given the supply chain issues we have in almost every industry. A certain amount of volume insurance here. Also, capital infusion. Remember, what we're dealing with is a cultural change right now. We have our bus providers with their very highly optimized, nurtured ecosystem of tier 2s and tier 3s and tier 1s, and they've worked with them for years. How can we get them to think about a new way to modify their components to the standard? And I think that's going to take time, and I think perhaps with some government capital infusion, that could get them over the hump and incent them in the right way towards this new type of approach with CPA. And I think they'll find a lot of opportunities to shine using their own proprietary technologies as well.
Oh, let me follow up on that, Karen. What do the commercial vendors think about this? And I realize that there's different levels of commercial vendors. You've got the primes, you've got the sub-tier contractors, and you explored a little bit of how they might be incentivized. But what are they really thinking about this? What are their concerns?
I think right now, and I think the world has very much changed in the last couple of months here, but I think they're looking at how can we make this work from the standpoint of volume. I think we're all looking at what's going to happen with spending, and are we on a precipice? If so, how can they ensure enough volume to meet their needs? I'm thinking about the primes and upstream with their tier 2s and 3s, and how can they maintain that supply chain? And in some ways, modularity frees them to some degree to be more flexible. At the same time, the upstream tier 2s and 3s also are able to now build to one interface standard. So I think they're going to see some cost savings. I think there's going to be some very good incentives from the cost perspective. But to do this involves, essentially crossing over to a new type of approach, which will require, again, capital infusion. So I think the next step is to think about what types of seed funding and grant could we offer to help make this a reality. I do think it's necessary, though. If we don't move to this modular architecture, we will not be able to adapt quickly enough to this threat. So I think that's the big issue, is how can we make this agile enough? And I think it's also going to invite in a lot of new players, new space, and maybe atypical space providers as well that may not have been that active in the past.
Well, thank you for that. I know, Malina, you're very close to a lot of these contractors. You've dealt with many of them for many years. What sorts of concerns have you been hearing? Anything in addition to what maybe Karen articulated?
Yes, from a technical perspective, they're concerned that we will drive the requirements and the specifications down at too low a level. So when you think about it, for a small satellite, such as the Space Test Program satellites, it's fairly easy to define a nice interface between the payload and the bus. When you try and scale that up, the payloads get far more complex, and there's more adaptation you have to do on the bus side to accommodate the payloads. So you take a ComSat. The communications payload requires a lot of power. So if your bus is designed to accommodate both a communication satellite and a GPS satellite, there are different levels of modularity of the power system that are required. So they're a little concerned that we will try to do too much with modularity and with interoperability. And they're also concerned that we will drive the level of the specification down too low. Now, they've optimized their satellites for very specific things, and they feel like they've got a competitive advantage by the way they've optimized their satellites. So we've got to make sure we don't specify the interoperability and modularity at too low a level, or they're not going to buy into it. But if we bring volume and we bring stability in the way that we contract for satellites, they are all in.
There's a lot for contractors to think about and a lot for the government to think about in trying to figure out how to incentivize them and make this go forward. We touched briefly in the presentation on this whole idea of launch on schedule versus launch on need. Malina, can you sort of take us through that topic a little bit? Because that's a pretty fundamental paradigm shift for launch, going to schedule rather than need. Why do we need to do that?
So absolutely, it's very important. So right now we don't launch on schedule, which is what's needed for CPA, right? You want to be able to build your satellite, ship it to the launch site, and then launch it. We do launch on need. So we may, after a satellite is built, put it into storage for months, maybe even a year. And the reason we do that is that launch is a scarce commodity. So we're given by Congress a certain amount of money to spend, which will cover a certain number of launches per year. And a launch provider may only get, say, 5 national security space launches in a year. And so it still costs a significant amount of money per launch. The lowest you can expect for a decent sized national security space satellite is about 100 million. So since launch is a scarce commodity, when it comes time to launch your satellite, you take your proposal to something called the Constellation Sustainment Assessment Team, the CSAT, and they'll prioritize all of the launches scheduled. And if your satellite isn't needed as much as somebody else's satellite, you may have to wait another 6 months. That is definitely not launch on schedule. What CPA will bring is far more launches, and that will drive the cost per launch down because a launch provider will be able to invest and become more efficient. And so we have the paradigm where the cost per launch goes down and we're putting many more satellites up at a time. So CPA is going to be good news for the launch industry also.
Thanks. Any additional thoughts, Karen?
Well, just getting back to the modular platform itself, I think it's exciting. When you think about other industries and how they have moved to modular platforms, whether it's the iPhone, the Android, the Arduino platform for the Internet of Things, or even the car industry, and certainly the cloud computing modular concepts as well. They embarked upon their modular journeys and platforms without really knowing everything that they would realize. And so I think we could find some interesting surprises by creating this platform-centric ecosystem of innovators. And I think, as Malina has already said, we have to make sure we do it right. And we have to make sure we don't get too far into the weeds with the specs. We've got to make it attractive for the commercial sector. And I think there's going to be some very interesting innovations that will be realized.
Thanks. Now I've got a question here that somebody who I think saw our announcement went ahead and sent in advance. It has to do with SPEC, the Space Enterprise Consortium, and is asking really about, are we doing more than just providing financial stability for contractors at the prime level and then for subcontractors? Are we doing other things that will incentivize them to make sure that they sustain their supply chain and support it, in addition to just, sort of providing the top level financial stability? I guess that's a question to jump ball, but I guess maybe Malina, if you've got some thoughts on that.
Okay, how about if I start with a few comments related to the coronavirus? Because actually we're seeing some good news there with respect to taking care of suppliers. So the government is forward paying some of the, well, accelerating some of the payments, I should say, to the primes, and then asking the primes to push those down to the suppliers. And the primes have been doing that. So that is very good news. We're also hoping to see an increase in the available funding for the space, national security space, in order to push that back into the industry in this time of coronavirus. So I think the government is responding right now, and there is some good news. Karen?
And do we have, oh, go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I was going to agree with that and say that, you know, the coronavirus, we refer to it as a black swan, but we've also known it's been coming for a while. I mean, many people who have looked at these pandemic situations or the potential for them realize it's just a matter of time. And I think now more than ever, we need to think about the next thing. And I hope it doesn't happen, but I think we need to be prepared for these worldwide catastrophes and prepare some kind of basis for the business plan to allow for some inventory buffering and some extra, I should say, capabilities in the system, either through modularity and an increased launch tempo to allow for these events.
There's no question that even before this latest Black Swan event, that the world situation is certainly driving us towards a need to have a very resilient space architecture, and frankly, a resilient industrial base in general for the entire economy. But obviously, the Defense Department is one we care a lot about because we want to make sure that we maintain our freedoms in this country. Let me just ask each of you, and I'll start with you, Karen. If you had to just pick one or two takeaways from continuous production agility and what it provides to help us move towards this goal of a more stable architecture for our space systems, what would those be?
I would say, one, know the commercial industry, speak to them regularly, understand their incentives and what helps them innovate, and work with them towards the specs that work for them as well as the entire ecosystem. So I'd say work towards that friendly platform and nurture your ecosystem of existing space players as well as welcoming new players. Always keep an eye out for new innovations and new players. I think I would just start with that. And then think beyond space. And then the other thing I'd say is look beyond the space sector at other industries as well, and what are they doing to manage some of these new threats we're facing and new cycles and instability, and continue to think about new ways to do things. But I think CPA really addresses that. It allows you that configurability and generational extensibility of what we have.
Thanks, Karen. Malina?
So having worked on those satellite programs that take a long time to get them on orbit, I'm very excited about the prospect of getting technology inserted in a rapid manner. And I think there's an opportunity to use that concept in other areas. For example, we didn't get to talk about the user equipment today, but if we can have more modular user equipment, we can bring capability out to the warfighter far quicker. So let's look at CPA across the entire space enterprise.
I think that's a great final remark. And the only other thing I would just bring us back to, and you touched on it, Malina, with your technology insertion comment. The value of being able to do that is that we can monitor how the threat is changing. And we have the ability with CPA to be able to actually insert technology on a quicker timescale so that we can stay ahead of our adversaries. And if I were going to end with one thought today, that would be the one I would end with, which is we have to stay ahead of the threat. That's our responsibility. And we're excited about new ways of doing business that will allow us to do that. Thanks, everybody, for listening to our presentation today.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so thrilled to have Dave, Karen, and Malina. We really appreciate you taking the time. As always, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Go to our website. We're at aerospace.org/policy. Check out the latest events and updates. Make sure you sign up to receive our emails. We will be coming out with our May schedule soon. And until then, take care.